Welcome to the NCDWI Guide podcast, where defenders of the Constitution assemble to prepare for courtroom battle and firm owners gather to develop marketing strategies that will revolutionize the practice of criminal defense. Here's your host, the NCDWI guy, Jake Minnick.
Hello, fellow freedom fighters, and welcome to episode 154 of the NCDWI Guy podcast. Today's episode is a must listen. If you practice any amount of criminal law, if you do DWI cases, this is super important because at one time or another, we are all going to represent somebody that is in active duty, that is a current service man or woman serving in the armed forces. And so today's episode, we are talking about the consequences, the military consequences of a DUI for somebody that is in active duty. Let's say they get a DUI while they are on leave or off base. This is going to be an extremely helpful episode to you. Stephen Goralski joins me on today's episode. He recently spoke at the North Carolina Advocates for Justice seminar on the collateral damage of a DUI, focusing again on the military consequences. And after that presentation, I just thought this would be something that would be so helpful for attorneys across the state that did not make that CLE to be able to hear. Stephen served in the Marine Corps for over 11 years. He ultimately attained the rank of major. He spent several years as a defense attorney at the Marine Corps base in Camp Lejeune. He also spent time as deputy staff judge advocate to the commanding general of Camp Lejeune. He currently is a private practice defense lawyer that helps primarily those that are in the military. And so on today's episode, you're going to hear him talk about his representation of clients that are facing investigation, facing a non-judicial punishment, that are facing some sort of administrative separation. He's going to talk about all of these things. He's going to talk about best practices for advising somebody, a current client that you represent in state court. He's going to talk about the importance of having that person quickly reach out to a military attorney and trying to make sure that they are approaching their pending charge in the appropriate manner when it comes to reporting and how to deal with consequences that are coming from their senior officer from the military. So really excited about today's podcast because it's something that I think we all deal with on a regular basis, but can be a black box. If you have questions about the military consequences of a DWI or any other criminal offense, please feel free to reach out to Stephen. He specifically told me that he would be happy to talk to any attorney that has questions about the military implications of receiving a criminal charge in state court. So please reach out to Stephen. He's more than happy to answer your questions. Really enjoyed this conversation, found it very informative, and look forward to having you all take a listen. So Stephen, excited to have you on to talk about kind of the military consequences of a DUI. It's something that is definitely a black box, I feel like, for a lot of criminal defense lawyers. How does a DWI kind of state received in state court, how does that interplay with the actual punishment that's going on base or in the military court? So we'll kind of get into that, but just give us a little bit of your background into military law. Tell us about your time serving in the military, and then kind of how you got on to the defense end of things in private practice.
Yeah. Quick overview is I was serving in the Marine Corps as a comptroller or controller, basically a finance officer, for about 6 years. Wanted to get out, and then heard about this program with the Marine Corps and all the services. They'll send select service members to law school, and that's your job for 3 years while you get paid. So it's a great.
It's pretty
program.
Sweet. Yeah.
And then you come back and you owe so many years to pay them back for that. So, I went to University of Louisville, Kentucky for 3 years, came back to Jacksonville, North Carolina, and then said I wanted to be in the defense office and did that for about 3 years.
Just quick question on that, because I don't think you and I have talked about this in the past. Is there any kind of say on the government's end in terms of what school you attend or what classes that you take, or is that left pretty well to the individual?
That's left to the individual. You just have to make sure you pass all your classes, and you have to make sure you pass the bar exam. If you don't pass the bar exam, it is a bad mark on your record, because now you're back in the fleet, as we call it. You're back at the Marine Corps, the service, to serve in that position, and you haven't passed the bar exam.
So even more pressure on you than the rest of us were feeling, and I was sweating plenty enough without that.
Oh, for sure. I actually, and some of us do this. I actually took 2 bar exams back to back, just so I'd have 2 bites at the apple. So to speak.
That's smart. Yeah, interesting.
So, because I didn't want to, potentially fail the exam and then, go to the fleet and they're like, hey, well, you're in a lawyer position, but we can't use you as a lawyer. Go study, and you're back studying for 6 months, and now you have a bad evaluation because you failed the bar and they weren't able to use you as an attorney, even though that's the spot that you're filling.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
So a lot of pressure, for sure.
Yeah, that is.
So then for 3 years, I paid back. I did my payback tour. Was in the defense offices of Camp Lejeune. Basically, it's like a public defender's office, so to speak. In the military, regardless of how much money you make, so you can make the lowest amount of money as a private, or you can be a general and make 10 to 15K a month, and you still get one of these attorneys assigned to your case. So that's how I learned about military law and the practice of military law. And then eventually I got out. I went the corporate route for about 18 months. And then I just wanted to go on my own. So, I hung a shingle, and since I know military law, that was just an easy area to get into for me. And that's what I've done. And, the people I served with are still in different, legal positions, prosecution, legal advisor, at Jacksonville, Camp Lejeune area. So it helps, reaching out to those people who have cases.
Yeah, that's great. In terms of the involvement while you were in the military, was that all kind of in the criminal justice end of things, or did you serve in any other capacity as a lawyer? What did that look like?
So I only served in defense as a defense attorney, and also as a legal advisor. So as a legal advisor, basically, it's like in-house counsel, so to speak. You're advising the commanders and the general of the law, what they can do, what they can't do, etc. So it's more than just criminal law and misconduct. You're also advising them on regulations, environmental type things that come up. How we can spend money, how we can't spend money. If they want to buy these these coins that they give out, there's certain things that have to be done. They can't have their own name on them. They have to just say Command General, etc. So there's a lot of rules and stuff that you advise the commands on. And then also when someone in the command does commit misconduct, you advise it's a separate role from the prosecution. So there's a prosecutor, and then there's a legal advisor, and the legal advisor basically tells the commanders, what they can and can't do as far as punishment.
Okay.
And then the prosecutor also may come in for a particular case and have a deeper understanding of the case and how likely it is that they might get a conviction, etc.
Okay. And we're going to kind of talk primarily today about kind of the specific crime of DUI and really focusing primarily on one that happens off base, and then the interplay between like state court and what's happening with the military. But in terms of your role as a defense lawyer, what type of charges were you involved in? Were there some that were like particularly like, the regular offenses? What did that look like in terms of things coming across your desk?
So a lot of what you see is a lot of drug use, because
okay,
service members, they get drug tested randomly, and they get drug tested a lot of times right after they come back from a holiday break. So, you got Christmas, Thanksgiving, President's Day. So a lot of times after those holidays, they'll be subject to a urinalysis. And, one thing that's big right now is the Delta 8 and Delta 9. So those things are readily available at like the CBD shops, and they're legal for the general public, but they're not legal for the military still.
Gotcha.
So you see a lot of drug pops, a lot of Delta 8, Delta 9, THC. If you see like cocaine or amphetamines or stuff like that, that's a little more serious, and that's where like NCIS and law enforcement will actually interview those people to try to find the source of those drugs. Also see like sexual assaults also, and we're going to talk about alcohol and DUIs later, but that's a lot. That alcohol is involved in many of these cases. You have drug use, right. When you have sexual assaults, typically there's always alcohol.
Yeah, I was recently listening to a podcast episode by Jocko Willink, whose discipline equals freedom mantra is behind me. And one of the things that he was advising, and I think this was particularly aimed at service people, he had an episode called "Don't Do Dumb Shit." And basically number one on the list was like, basically stay away from alcohol. He was like, but 9 times out of 10, if I was involved in an incident with my guys or had to reprimand my guys, alcohol was involved. So it's definitely, seems like a particularly like prevalent source of problems for not just the general public, but also obviously anybody that's a service member. I mean, it's no different.
Right. No, for sure. And a majority of the service members are young. They're young. 18 to 25. Obviously, there's older service members than that, but that's like the bulk. 18 to 25. So yeah. I mean, when they're not working, a lot of service members engage, consuming alcohol, and a lot of misconduct happens, when people are highly intoxicated, things of that nature.
Yeah. So I guess let's kind of dive into that. And I think this is just such a helpful thing for us, because, I've had so many clients that have gotten, a DWI in the counties that I practice in while they're on leave, generally is kind of what I typically see. And then so the questions kind of become, how is this going to impact my military career? Is my command going to find out about this? What should I do? How should I plead to these charges? So, we'll kind of take these things one at a time. But in terms of just what happens kind of on the front end of things when a member of the military gets a DUI off base, what does that process look like? And I know that, this may look slightly different depending on which branch of the military that the person is in, but if you can just kind of give an overview of What does that look like on the military's end when somebody gets an off base DUI?
Okay. So, there's multiple pieces to that question. So if they receive a DUI in the immediate vicinity of where they're stationed, take Jacksonville, North Carolina for a second. You have Camp Lejeune and then you have Jacksonville. And then you have Fort Bragg and then you have Fayetteville. So if a service member gets a DUI in those counties that those bases are located in, most likely the command's going to find out because there's coordination between the police department and the military police. So the military is going to find out, the command's going to find out if you receive a DUI in the same county that the base is stationed.
Do you know how that coordination kind of takes place? Is that from the military kind of like proactively reaching out to local law enforcement in those locations, or what does that look like?
Yeah, I don't know the specific details, but that's my understanding of it, is that, there is a relationship with, the local police department and also the military police, is my understanding.
Okay, interesting.
And what they do too is, like, the military police is they put together what we call a blotter, and basically it's, hey, in the last week, like, all these people were either pulled over or arrested for these different things.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and then they send that out to the units, and the units, look at those and see their roster, who got in trouble. As far as like being on leave and getting a DUI in another location, that's really up for the service member to inform their command. So the Navy and the Marine Corps have an order that says that you shall report whenever you're arrested. You don't have to give details on, the circumstances surrounding your arrest, although they'll ask those questions. But you have to at least let them know that you were arrested. If you don't let them know you were arrested and they later find out, then that's a separate charge called failure to obey an order of regulation, Article 92. So you can be charged with not following that.
So for us, in the kind of state defense side of things, generally speaking, if a client calls us the night after getting arrested and says, what do I need to do, at a bare minimum, they likely would need to report that to their commanding officer.
Especially if they're Marine Corps, Navy. I will tell you that the Army doesn't have that regulation or rule, but some of us have security clearances, and if you have a security clearance, then you're supposed to report arrests also.
Okay.
But I'll tell you, a recent call that I got is someone received a DUI in Wilmington, North Carolina. They didn't tell their command. They took care of it. And then their ex-girlfriend, called the command and reported that service member. So now he's facing separation for that. And
that's based primarily on the failure to report versus just the fact that he was convicted. Was that kind of...
For this particular situation, it was I believe he had 2 alcohol related incidents, and DUI being a second. So that's like another factor.
Okay,
also,
gotcha.
Is how many alcohol related incidents do you have? So one, he didn't report it, even though the particular branch doesn't have a reporting requirement. It still doesn't look good. And then on top of it, I believe there might have been another alcohol related incident. So when a service member, receives a DUI and they come to you or, one of your colleagues or someone else practicing DUI in the state courts, the first thing is like, hey, what are your obligations per your branch? If you're Marine Corps, Navy, you should report it. What's the saying? Bad news doesn't get better with time.
That's right. It doesn't.
So the sooner you report, the better. And then for the other branches, if you do have a security clearance, regardless of what branch, there's a requirement to report based on your security clearance. And so at the end of the day, I mean, for the most part, reporting the incident to the military. But, also speaking to someone that is versed in military yes. law, because I mentioned the requirement was to report an arrest, but you don't necessarily have to give details. So, just advising the individual, hey, you have to report this, but you don't have to get into details on, hey, you drank, X amount of drinks, etc. Because also what I tell clients that are facing a DUI and facing administrative separation, sometimes I'll reach out to their state lawyer and ask them where the case is, because I don't want to go to an administrative separation hearing and they divulge all this evidence, or they make statements, and then those statements are then used in the state prosecution.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's best for them to reach out to someone that knows military law, and also probably inform their command.
And once they've kind of got through that process of making, divulging that information, what is kind of like the, what's going on the military side of things as the state case is pending? So on a DWI in state court, again, it depends on the county how quickly these things proceed, but typically there's it's generally not the case that you see like an end of the case within a 60-day time frame. That's possible, but it's generally a little bit of a longer process in state court. So as I'm trying to get information about the case, discovery, and that type of thing. What's going on in terms of the military's response to that charge?
So the military, they're going to handle it administratively.
Okay.
And they can, they're notified of a DUI, and, things are going on in state court. They have a range of things they can do to that service member, regardless of what's going on out of town. Now, sometimes, I tell the client to, hey, talk to the command and see if they will wait to take disciplinary action until your case is adjudicated out of town. So some commands are understanding, and they'll do that. They'll wait for the case to be adjudicated out in state court and then take disciplinary action. But some commands, they're not going to wait for that. They're going to take disciplinary action immediately. And there's a range of things they can do. They can, number one, give them a written counseling. Number two, they can give them what's called an Article 15 or non-judicial punishment. So basically, that's where the service member goes before the commanding officer, and the commanding officer, the service member pleads their case to the commanding officer, and then the commanding officer gives them punishment. For most, for majority of the ranks, that punishment is reduction in rank, forfeiture of half month's pay for 2 months, and restriction for 60 days, or restriction for 45 days with 45 days extra duty. So what does restriction look like? It depends. The Marine Corps, they're more like strict with restriction. So, I've had people that are married and have a house out in town, and those individuals get restriction, and they'll be forced to stay in the barracks for, 45 to 60 days and not be able to go home to the wife and kid. Yeah. So basically they're just going to work, going to eat, going to the gym, and going back to the room. So it's like adult time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And is that non-judicial punishment, does that look the same, relatively speaking, across the different branches, or is it different?
That's across all the branches. Um, that's across all the branches. Now, as far as I was talking about restriction. Now, the Army's not that bad with restriction. Where if you have a house and wife and kid, they'll say, "Hey, you're going to live in the barracks for 45 to 60 days." I heard they're not that extreme with it. But yeah, NJP or Article 15. That's the article under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Um, that's the same across the branches. It's just implementing it is also the same. It's just like restriction, or even within the different branches, some of the different like units, like if you're an infantry unit, they're usually more strict with discipline than like an air, like the Second Marine Air. Now the air wing's a little, they're not as much disciplinarians as the infantry units or
Okay,
the ground
interesting.
common arms units. So you do see a difference in that also. But so counselings, Article 15, NJP, they're not going to do a court martial because it's already being taken care of in state courts. But also they could be facing administrative separation. So for one DUI, the commander has discretion on whether to send them through the administrative separation process. I'm hearing though right now, if you get a DUI, they're sending people to administrative separation.
Okay. And this is for both officer and enlisted. It doesn't make
correct.
Okay.
Correct. That's what I'm hearing. That's the current stance now, especially at Fort Bragg. Just talked to one of the attorneys out there. That's kind of like a public defender. They call them TDS, Trial Defense Services Attorneys. I spoke to one of the attorneys there because they see all the cases coming through, and she was telling me that they're administratively separating officers enlisted that get a DUI. Like I said, there's discretion though. They have the discretion to send those people to ADSEP or not. But apparently right now, that's what they're doing.
Hey, podcast listeners, I want to briefly interrupt today's episode to invite you to join me at the inaugural Freedom Fighter Summit in Asheville this October. This in-person only event is designed for growth-minded lawyers determined to take their criminal defense practice to the next level. Due to the size of the summit's venue, there are a limited number of seats available. Don't miss out on the incredible lineup of speakers and spectacular networking opportunity that this summit provides. For more details, visit www.miniclaw.com/summit. Enter the promo code NCDWI-GUY, all lowercase, all one word, at checkout for $150 off your summit ticket. Look forward to seeing you there. Now back to the show.
I will tell you though, if they have two all-call related incidents, then they have to be put through the process. Okay, so an all-call related incident could be something as simple as underage drinking. When they're underage, now they're of age, they get a DUI. Those are two incidents. So the commander is required to send them through the process.
And those two incidents don't necessarily have to be as a result of some sort of like criminal charge, correct? If there's a report filed related to underage drinking. Okay.
Correct. It's funny because I had a case with a guy. He was a passenger in a vehicle that got pulled over. The driver and the passenger were both military. The driver got a DUI citation, and he obviously he didn't get a DUI. He's a passenger, but the military still counseled him, still wrote him up for not making better judgment for the two of them, etc. So he was facing administrative separation, and just that incident, him being a passenger, in the vehicle where the driver received a DUI, that was considered one all-call related incident.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And then you get that, and then you get a DUI, and the commander has to send you through the process. And administrative separation, what I tell people to try to relate that, what does that look like? It's basically an employment hearing. You didn't follow the rules, and now we're sending you to this employment hearing. And there's 4 different things that we have to decide on. Number 1, are you guilty of what you're accused of by a preponderance of the evidence? So do you have 2 alcohol related incidents, or were you drinking and driving? Were you drinking and then got behind the wheel of the vehicle? And so 3 board members decide whether they believe that or not, whether you're guilty or not of that by a preponderance of the evidence. And then if it's called basis, so then if they decide a basis is met, then they go on to the second. The second question for them, which is a recommendation: should this service member be separated or retained? So if they're retained, they just go back and continue on with their career. If they're separated, then they go on to the third decision, which is a recommendation as to that individual's characterization of service. Is that characterization honorable? Is it general under honorable conditions, or is it other than honorable? And so basically, that's almost like a testament to their performance, and so it relates almost like a reference. You were in the military, you served X amount of years, and your DD 214 says honorable or other than honorable. So that's the third decision they make, is what is this person's characterization of service? And then the fourth is, should we suspend this individual's separation for up to 12 months? And those 4 decisions go up to the commanding general, and then he signs off on it. He can't give the service member any worse than what the board recommended, but he doesn't have to follow. The one recommendation he doesn't have to follow is the suspension for 12 months. So the board could have recommended suspension for 12 months, and the general can say, no, we're going to separate you right now.
Gotcha. Okay. And in terms of the administrative separation decision in the first place, you said with a first alcohol related incident that is discretionary, what types of things do you generally see kind of going into that? Is it, based on rank, based on how long you've been in the military, the incident itself, all of those things? What are some of the major factors that you see on that front?
So, I always tell people, I always tell clients, it's easier to defend people that have great performance and conduct. So if you're a service member and you have a history of a disciplinary action against you, then you're most likely going to be separated.
Okay, gotcha.
Now, if you're a high performer, I'm talking about really high performer, take initiative, et cetera, then, plus you have a good career so far, they might not initially send you to administrative separation. They might give you an Article 15, an NJP, but they'll stop there. I have seen that before, where, an individual received a DUI, this individual received NJP, so rank was taken away, and then this individual continued on and performed well. But this individual was a great performer before this person received the DUI.
In terms of that initiative of somebody that is kind of proactively addressing the charge, in this case DUI, what are some steps that you would either recommend, or when somebody does them, you're that's going to be helpful, kind of on the front end of things? What does that look like?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah. So I mean, maybe I misheard you, Stephen.
Yeah.
I thought you had said that, for somebody that's kind of being proactive or taking initiative in response to the charge,
Okay. Okay.
is there things that a service member could do kind of after getting that charge to really say, to show, look, I made a mistake and I'm trying to address this. And if so, what are some of those things that they could do?
Oh, so initially, I think I misspoke, or there's a misunderstanding. So initially, I was saying that, for service members that have high performance at work, take initiative at work,
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
go
I
above
gotcha.
go above and beyond their duties,
Okay.
then they're going to be in a lot better position.
That
But to
makes
answer,
sense. Okay.
but to answer your question, yeah, if you have a high performer, they take initiative in the job, and then they're immediately forthcoming with the DUI, they're probably going to fare well. Um, if they try to hide the DUI, later comes out that they received a DUI, depending on what branch, but now they're looking at, not only were you drinking and driving, but also you failed to report this. So that's an additional charge. And also, a even though, and also, they kind of lose credibility when they're not forthcoming.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. Yeah. And I know that we have, in the past, had clients that were going through, like a, non-judicial punishment, or kind of like dealing with some of the military consequences. And on the state court end of things, I've used some of those consequences that they've received kind of as a result of their employment to tell the judge, this is somebody that's kind of being punished, or is kind of learning their lesson beyond what somebody in state court might otherwise be required to do because they're in the military and these other things are going on. On the state end of things, a lot of times there is like community service required, or potentially jail time, getting an alcohol assessment and treatment. There might be people that get inpatient treatment of some sort, or do some sort of other program. And so, yeah, I was wondering if maybe some of that might be able to be used to show that the service member was kind of taking, seriously what's the position they put themselves in. So I didn't know if, getting an alcohol assessment quickly, or starting the treatment program before they get kind of too far down that road with their commanding officer has any impact.
Yeah. So I mean, the military, if they get a DUI, they'll direct them to go get an all-call assessment. The military has their own, all-call programs.
Okay.
But I would think that, when a service member gets a DUI, I think the service would act quicker than the courts.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, or some
that makes sense.
But like you said, I think those are good things to use, and if you could articulate that to the judge, what restriction looks like. Restriction is basically they're confined to their barracks room, and they can only go to work, to eat, and to the gym. And outside of those time frames, they have to report in every couple hours. So it's almost like you're in confinement.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Almost like house arrest or something like that. They also, and then extra duties, what that looks like, how you could articulate that to like community service is when they're assigned restriction and extra duties, they have to like go around the grounds of the barracks and like pick up the trash, pick up trash. They might have to do different clean stuff like that.
Okay.
In the immediate vicinity. As far as, they also forfeit half month's pay for 2 months. That's a punishment that a lot of them get. So, that's potentially thousands of dollars for some of the guys. So they're already giving up, they're giving up pay, they're giving up rank, and now they're like on house arrest, so to speak, for, 60 to 45 days. Um, so these are all punishments that they get from an NJP or Article 15. In addition, like you're saying, they do have substance abuse, counselors and programs that they have to at least be evaluated on, and then those individuals make an assessment on if they need, they need to go through the program. So that's maybe something also that your clients could use to show the courts is, hey, I went to this awful assessment program through the military, and here are the results of that assessment. I completed the program, and that's another thing. When a service member gets a DUI, they're directed to get assessed through the military alcohol, abuse program. If they fail that program, they can be separated also.
Okay. And in terms of the, for somebody that's going through like a non-judicial punishment versus an administrative separation, is that something where a attorney kind of on the military end of things is involved either way? I mean, obviously they should talk to, somebody that knows military law to kind of understand what their best like course of action is in terms of how to handle the case and what maybe to disclose and those type of things. But at what point would somebody that's in the military actually have kind of a lawyer on those, kind of military hearings?
Yeah. So just to go through the flow of how it happens. So they get a DUI, the military finds out or they report it, and then their commander decides, their commander usually gives them NJP or Article 15.
Okay.
Right. Now they can deny that. And then the commander can either send it to court-martial or just go through the administrative separation process.
Okay.
So a lot of times I'll get calls where guys are facing NJP or Article 15, and they're looking for advice and they're looking what to do. And like I tell them, ultimately they have to make the decision on whether to accept or deny NJP or Article 15. But at the end of the day, they might face administrative separation regardless if deny NJP. So do you want to, be on restriction for up to 60 days and lose rank and lose money and still go to administrative separation? Or do you want to deny?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or do you want to deny it? And do you want to deny Article 15 NJP and then, face administrative separation with your same rank, money, etc.? So a lot of times they'll consult me when they're facing NJP or Article 15. They can also walk into some of the defense offices on base and get advice from those lawyers. Once they're notified of administrative separation, that's when they get one of the military lawyers assigned to them at no cost to them.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
So only two ways they get a military attorney assigned to them is number one, if they're charged under the UCMJ, if they receive charges, or number two, if they're facing administrative separation.
Okay. So
they can consult with these people during walk-in hours. They can walk in and get legal advice from them. But they're not their attorney until they're either charged or notified of administrative separation. So that's why sometimes they reach out to people like me and hire me beforehand, so I can consistently advise them and advocate for them before they get notified.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think the earlier that you get somebody involved on that side of things, it's always going to be the better, because you don't want to be scrambling for information at the last second, or be sitting down
Right.
with your commanding officer trying to figure out how to have this conversation or what you should or should not say. I think that's something
Right.
that you want to reach out to somebody as early in the process as possible.
Right. And just, you brought something to mind also, if they still have a state case outstanding, sometimes I'll reach out to that attorney, or sometimes I'll tell them to talk to their attorney about this. But, you know, potentially I don't want them making a statement at NJP or making a statement at administrative separation that might get into the hands of the state prosecutor
Right.
and used against them in state courts. So that's a concern also.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in terms of the so kind of going back to administrative separation now, for somebody that is separated, and I know that there's quite a few consequences that you've shared in the past, kind of as to what happens following administrative separation, but kind of in terms of like big picture, what does that look like for somebody that actually gets separated?
So there's a complex answer to that. So if it's their first enlistment, if it's their first enlistment and they get separated with, an other than honorable, they essentially have no veteran benefits. The only benefit they have is they can go to the VA for mental health help, mental health assistance, mental health issues. The next one above that is general under honorable conditions. So with a general under honorable conditions, they have all their benefits except their education benefits. So they have the VA home loan. They can go to the VA for any issues. They feel sick. The VA is like a free clinic for them. And also, if they have any service-connected disabilities, they can get disability compensation for the rest of their life with that general under honorable conditions. And then with an honorable, you have all your benefits, including your post 9/11 GI Bill. And, that's the big thing that, service members are trying not to lose, because not only does that pay for your undergraduate college, but you also get $1,000 book stipend, and you get a housing allowance each month that you're in school. So that housing allowance could potentially be, $1,000 to, $3,000, depending on where that school's located. The BAH is based on an E5, the rank of an E5 in the location of that school. So for like Jacksonville, you can't. In Jacksonville, it might be around like $1,300. I'd have to look it up, but it's a good amount of money for a college student.
Yeah, for sure.
So they would lose all that. So that's with an honorable. So if you get anything less than an honorable, you lose that education benefit. And then there's the general under honorable, and then there's the other than honorable. With the other than honorable, you pretty much have lost everything. Going to administrative separation, you're basically trying to fight, not only, no basis or retention, but if you get to the third recommendation, characterization of service, I mean, a lot of times you're going from like the other than honorable to the general. To advocate for an honorable is very difficult, and you could lose credibility because the members have already decided that they're guilty of what they're accused of. I mean, these are all done in deliberations all at the same time. So, you don't know like what they've chosen for the first two, but, if that individual is facing administrative separation, it's very difficult to argue for an honorable characterization of service. Usually we're arguing like no basis, or the person should be retained. And if they're not retained, then they should get at least a general under honorable conditions. Very hard for someone to be separated and get an honor. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, that would probably be a pretty rare situation, especially with something as serious as a DUI, I would assume.
Right. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, definitely did. So I think in terms of, maybe in terms of kind of like a parting parting thought here, Stephen. What, we talked about some of this already. So, either feel free to reiterate or kind of go down some new path. But in terms of somebody that gets a DUI, again, off base, so that, they're facing this in state court, what if anything would you kind of advise that person to do?
So I talked to them about, so if they already have an attorney so first, when people call me, say they got a DUI out of town, I say, number one, make sure you get a state attorney to deal with the state case. Number two, if you have a security clearance, or you're in the Marine Corps or the Navy, make sure you tell your command sooner rather than later. If you're in one of the other branches, it's up to you to reveal that. But if they do find out later for whatever reason, it's not going to look well upon you. And then I go into NJP. You can accept or deny NJP. It's really up to you, but ask your command to hold off on any disciplinary punishment until your state case is adjudicated. And then I talk to them about the ADSET process. If it's their second all-call related incident, they will go to administrative separation. For DUI, like right now, most commands, most services are separating people with just one DUI. Okay, so just advise them of that's a real possibility. So that's basically it in a nutshell. But another thing that I thought about while I was talking is that for you state practitioners, that that's the general guidance for like a service member getting a DUI. But if it's something where like someone was killed in an accident, really need to coordinate that with a military attorney, because what can happen is if your client in state court gets a plea deal and then takes that plea deal and pleads guilty to some charges, and the military isn't satisfied with that, the military will court-martial that person for say someone died in all-call related accident. They take some kind of like really light plea deal in state court. The military might want to court-martial them because they didn't feel that the punishment in state court was enough. And interestingly enough, they're two different sovereigns, so there isn't what is it called?
Double jeopardy.
Two different. Yeah, there isn't double jeopardy because they're two different sovereigns, and they'll court-martial that person for additional charges that they didn't plead guilty to in state court. But what's interesting is they can use that guilty plea in order to prove elements of those other charges at court-martial. So I didn't realize that until recently. I have a case. It's not DUI related, but that person pled guilty in state court, and they're going to use that guilty plea in state court to prove elements of the other charges in court-martial.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think I would just kind of re-echo what you started off your kind of advice with, which is call a state attorney. And I think anybody that calls, you got a potential client that calls, those of you listening, calls you about their local DUI that they got, but they're also a member of the military. I think advising them to pretty much immediately reach out to Stephen or somebody else that is involved with military law is really important, because questions very likely are coming sooner than later from those up the chain of command. And you want to arm them with the ability to respond to whatever inquiries or needs to disclosure happen. So I think that should be kind of an immediate to do. And then I'd also advise anybody that does not see this regularly to try to reach out personally themselves, not just to advise their client, but to actually reach out themselves to a military lawyer that's handling the kind of defense end of things from the base side of things, so that you can whether coordinate that or just better understand the ramifications that your client is facing in state court. If you found the information in this podcast to be valuable, I simply ask that you pay it forward and share this podcast with another member of the legal community. Also, if you would leave us a rating or a review on whatever platform you are listening on, I would greatly appreciate it.